Hello, everyone. This is Debra Richardson, and today I am putting the AP in Happy, where accounts payable teams are empowered to protect the vendor master file from fraud. This podcast will give a voice to accounts payable team members by talking about the growing reality of cyber attacks in their world and which vendor setup and vendor management techniques they can apply to protect the vendor master file from fraud. Need training? Visit the Vendor Process Training Center to enroll in your choice of weekly live and on demand training sessions. Plus, get access to vendor setup form templates and reference tools that will help you and your team avoid fraud, fines, and bad vendor data. So, sign up for a free account to get access to free training sessions, vendor process FAQs, and a resource library with information you need to manage your vendor master file. Visit training.debrarrichardson.com today. The link will be in the show notes. When was the last time you reviewed your security roles and what access was included? Reduce the potential for fraud by restricting who has access to your vendor data. Keep listening. Welcome to episode 293 in 5 Steps, a security audit to protect vendor data and avoid fraud. Now, hopefully you understand why you need to do security audits. I understand that the issue that maybe you don't have time to do it, but just to clarify here, when it's related to fraud, you want to do security audits because the less non-vendor team members that have access to sensitive data, and you might be surprised how many have access to vendor sensitive data, the less potential for them to be social engineered into giving it away, resulting in fraud. And so I'm going to put on a webinar that is called In 5 Steps. And this is the webinar series for 2024, the monthly webinar series. Last year is 20 tips in 20 minutes. This year is In 5 Steps, where I show you how to build something or do something in 5 steps. And so today you're going to listen to the webinar that was January's. And so I'm going to go ahead and put that on. But before I do, I am going to let you know what the immediate takeaways are. So first, there are 4. You're going to discover at least 3 key pieces of vendor data that are considered sensitive. And then number 2 is you will learn what is least privileged access and why it's critical to follow for vendor sensitive data. Number 3 is you'll learn how to identify risks that result from unnecessarily exposing vendor sensitive data. And then the last one, number 4, is of course the 5 steps to implement a security audit that can be performed by the vendor team, and get this, with minimal IT input. And so I will put a link to the webinar itself. I'm going to bring the recording here, but if you want to watch it, I'll put a link to where you can watch it. And then also that will allow you to download the PDF. And I think I have another handout attached to it. So don't forget to check the show notes for that. All right. So the webinar recording is coming up, and I hope you like it. Welcome to the monthly webinar series. This is the first one for 2024, and if you guys have attended any of mine in the past or last year for 2023, the theme for all months was 20 tips in 20 minutes. Well, this year's theme, 2024 for all months, will be in 5 steps. So I'll show you how to do something in 5 steps, because I always like for you guys to have takeaways. I don't know if you noticed that, but I always like to have action items or takeaways. But in any event, welcome to this first in 5 steps for January. And we're going to talk about a security audit to protect your vendor data and avoid fraud. And we're doing this on the last week of, actually now the last day of January, but typically these will be scheduled for the third week in third Wednesday of the month. All right, so let's get started. I do have some housekeeping items. So this session is being recorded. Tomorrow you will receive a link. And as a matter of fact, it is a new link because of the way that I have to set it up so you can automatically download the PDFs. But it'll be a new link to the recording. And when you get to the recording, you'll be able to download the PDFs right from that recording platform. And if you know or have any colleagues that you think would also benefit from this, you can also forward that to them as well. Now, as for questions, because it's only 30 minutes, I'm not going to take time throughout the webinar to stop and answer questions, but as you think of them, please put them in the Q&A section, and then that way, I think what you see is question/chat area, but then that way, when I get to the question section, which should be probably about the last 5 or so minutes of the webinar, I'll have them there and can start answering as soon as possible. Now, I do have 2 handouts. The one is a PDF of the presentation, and then the second one is a vendor process training schedule for the 2024 Vendor Process Training Center, which I'll talk about momentarily. Now, I always do this. I never introduce myself initially, but I am Debra Richardson. I was an AP senior manager over global vendor setup. I had a team that processed over 2,000 vendor requests per month. We maintained 140,000 vendors across 7 different ERPs. And for those of you who want to know how many 1099s they are, that converted to, just because, you know, this is January 31st, that was up to about 30,000. Anywhere from 24,000. So I hope I just had a little bit of a tech. Okay, great. Thank you for that. Yeah, I don't know. Sometimes I leave this camera on and it's fine. And then other times I leave it on and I run into technical issues. So hopefully I won't go through that. That won't happen again. We should still have enough time to get through the content in this webinar. So starting back again, Debra Richardson, and I think I ended up talking about how many 1099s just because today's January 31st, but it was anywhere from 24,000 to 30,000 that we would have to send out. And by the way, we did all that in-house, including the printing. Yeah, I must have been crazy on that one, but it was a big company, and we also had, which I don't often mention, but we had over 100,000 or more employees, and even our AP team was almost 200. So as you can imagine, that is a lot of potential for both internal and external fraud. And as a matter of fact, I was 2 years into that job before I even found out that the purchasing team had access to edit one screen on the vendor record. Didn't even know it, but I'll talk about that a little later. Now I work with teams like yours to add authentication techniques, internal controls, best practices, vendor validations to avoid fraud, fines, and bad vendor data. All right, so let's take a look at the agenda. So very simple. We're first going to talk about why a security audit, and then we will go through the 5 steps of how to create one or how to perform one, and then we'll have time, hopefully up to 5 minutes for Q&A. Might have cut out some time with that technical issue, but I'll see what I can do to speed that up. First, though, we do have just one poll, the only poll of the webinar. I'm going to go ahead and launch that. I would like to know what department Let me go ahead and launch. So what department manages the vendor process? Is it accounts payable? Is it purchasing? Is it the vendor data management group? Is it split between groups? And so this would be your option if you have, let's say, the vendor team or accounts payable team handling the vendor request, but maybe you have another team that makes the confirmation call. We'll talk about that too, but could be D or it could be another group. I know a lot of you that may have SAP have like a master data management group, because you also have customers that could, and you guys can combine that customer record and the vendor records, and you may have a different group. But go ahead, and I'll probably give about 10 more seconds for you to respond. I have just over 57%, so I usually like to get to the 70 or 80%. So if you haven't responded, go ahead and respond to the poll. And yeah, I've got 70%, so I'm going to go ahead and close that. And let's take a look at the results. So it looks like the majority, which is typical, is in accounts payable, but then we have 24% a tie between vendor data management group, and then also split between groups, and then 6%, only 6% are in purchasing. Okay, usually purchasing is a little higher than that, but it could just be, right, those that are attending, or maybe there is a trend from to bring purchasing or bring vendor management out of purchasing. Actually, that's my vote, because I think when it's under purchasing, the focus of the vendor validations and the maintenance is just different than when it's in accounts payable or a dedicated group. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and hide that poll. Thanks everyone that responded, and let's get started. So we're going to get started with why a security audit, and really focus on least privilege access. So first, what is least privilege access? So if you Google it, it will say, or it will define it as an official or a user or entity should only have access to the specific data, resources, and applications needed to complete a required task. So if you convert that to the vendor team and the vendor master file, and avoiding payment fraud, what that means to me is that you need to limit who has access to view and edit the vendor record. And so here's how I see limiting access that can avoid fraud. And so one of the first things you can limit access to avoid fraud is avoiding that social engineered sharing. So that's one of the first things limiting access can do for you. And this is where, because some of you may think, well, what's wrong with view? This is where view access can cause fraud. So I know you and your team, hopefully have put into place controls to avoid payment fraud, like, requiring existing banking in order to change banking. That is a great control. However, that does not do any good if the fraudsters call Helpful Sally, and I always, pick on Helpful Sally. If your name is Sally and you're on this webinar, I'm not talking about you, but that control again does no good if Helpful Sally is way too helpful and gives out that information because fraudsters say, that they can't get anyone on the phone and she sounds nice and can you help me please? That happens. The other way that you can use least privilege access to avoid fraud is avoiding external and occupational fraud, which I don't talk about so often, right? So Helpful Sally help the fraudster get past your controls for a successful external payment fraud. But you also have to worry about that internal fraudster that if they have the right access, they can change vendor banking to their own banking right before the pay cycle because they know when it is, and then change it right back after the pay cycle has run. Now that happens too, especially if you don't have other controls in place. And then also, you do need to make sure you're always limiting vendor sensitive data from being exposed unnecessarily. And so when we talk about vendor sensitive data that's on the vendor record, we're talking about the tax ID. I know it can be an employer identification number or EIN, but you know what? It can also be a social security number for those vendors that are individual, sole proprietor, or even single member LLCs. Also, if you are collecting the date of birth, which in some scenarios, the IRS does require, maybe other countries require it too. I know Italy does under certain scenarios. Then you need to make sure, because both of those, social security number, date of birth, are sensitive personal identifiable information. So you want to make sure that you always keep those from being exposed unnecessarily, along with banking, right? Because both internal and external fraudsters are targeting vendors' banking to perpetrate payment fraud. So a security audit will help because it will, one, identify the roles that have access to the vendor master file, and then it will determine what access each role has, and then finally identifying whether team members need that security role or access. And when I say team members, I'm also referring to positions as well. And as I said before, I was in my position 2 years before I figured out that procurement or purchasing had access to the contact screen on the vendor record. And it wasn't until we did a security role or access audit did I find that out. And the reason, I know why they did it. The reason was because they thought that it would take too long, or maybe it did, right? Too long for them to submit a request to update contact information, because at the time they had automated purchase orders that would automatically be sent to the vendors when they were issued, and they would send them either via fax or email address, and so they had to have that updated information on the vendor file or a vendor record, and so they had access to do that. Now, the problem is that that also gave them access to edit the contact information that we used for confirmations of changed vendor data. And so we couldn't have them have access to update that information. And so we took it away. Now, I did give them the ability to, or I did give them a special queue in our request queue or in our request platform that they could submit their request to, and then I assigned someone specifically to it so that we would pick them up and it wouldn't take like the normal 48 hours in the regular queue. They still weren't happy with that, but you know what? That was okay because we were able to mitigate any potential issues that might cause fraud with that removal of their access. And so leadership supported it, and so it did stick. Sometimes it doesn't always stick, but it did stick in this case. And so we were able to mitigate that fraud risk, which the only way that we found out was through a security audit. So let's talk about that security audit to protect vendor data and avoid fraud in 5 steps. And for those of you that think you can't do it at your level, like you think IT or maybe the system security team needs to do it, at the best, or is it at the least, you may still need to include them to pull information, or maybe you collaborate with them. But keep in mind, they may not know what access is needed or what your controls are in order to avoid payment fraud. And so you want to make sure that you at least have that say, some input into it. And by initiating the security audit, even if you have to collaborate with them throughout, will make sure or ensure that you have a say in it. All right, so let's start with step one. Step one is to simply identify the security roles that have access to the vendor master file and then see what they can view or edit. Now, I will have an example, but a couple slides down, but you want to make sure that you pull that information. Now, IT or system security may need to run a report for you because maybe you don't have access to that. But pull in each role, again, that has access to the vendor master file. So that's any vendor management roles, accounts payable roles, procurement roles, maybe roles that are that are for internal team members, right? And verify what they have access, right, to view or if they have access to edit. And this, I've identified some, options or some things that they may have the ability to do by role, but this is like very simple. Yours could be a little bit more complex. So maybe you have several roles under each category. Maybe your roles are broken down, right, based on record account type. So maybe you've got roles that have access to vendor types like employees or board members. And I do advocate for that too, because then you can separate who has access to see each. Or maybe you have your role set up by, I don't know, company code, like if you have SAP. So but I broke it down based on function. Yours may be slightly different, but for each one of those roles, identify, right, what they have the option to do. And I did put some examples under each one. Now, each of these, right, I have identified have the ability to search vendor records, but then the additional access and what they're able to do is just based on function. Okay. Now, right, that you know what roles are out there and what they have access to do, the step two is to match them to the position based on the task assigned. And so I've identified here some vendor function positions or roles and what they have access to do. And so you'll notice here I've got some different access based on the type of role. So a vendor manager role would have the ability to approve. Maybe they have the ability to see or edit confidential information. Of course, they'll have the search, but then as you go down to clerk, they don't have all of those, the ability to approve, only to add or edit, search, and they may even, right, be based on company code or vendor type, something along those lines. And then same thing with accounts payable positions, procurement positions, and then again with the internal team members. So you want to make sure that you're matching those to a specific position. And one of the reasons why this is important is because at the end of the day, you want to make sure that when you onboard or when team members are onboarded, that they are assigned the correct role. So that's what you want to do as step two. Now, step three, you're going to look at you're going to look at the roles, and you're going to look at the roles that belong by position, and you're going to verify, right? Ask questions to verify if those are if those are correct, if the security roles are correct by position, and then if the individual employees are assigned the right roles. And the way you do that is just start asking questions, right? So I put some examples down here. Did the employee leave the company or position? Is this the right security role for this employee or position? Do they need to see vendor sensitive data? Do they need to see the full vendor sensitive data, or can it be masked? And I say this a lot. If you have AP team members whose role is or function is to post invoices, but in order to post invoices, they have to make sure they have the right vendor record. Well, you know, they don't need to see the entire tax ID, right, to confirm that they're using or that they're posting to the right vendor record. They can use the last 5 digits, so consider that as well. Consider, you know, will removing access reduce internal external fraud risk? Does it cause a segregation of duties issue? Because, you know, sometimes even if the team members don't know it, they may have access to do things that do result or can result in a segregation of duties issue. Like they may have the access to post the invoice and edit a vendor. That's absolutely a no-no. They may not know it, but, you know, your security audit may reveal that. And then here's some additional questions. Last one here, and I used to get this question a lot, but I know that maybe some of you have that confirmation call when there is a bank change, and that confirmation call is with another group because you're thinking that that will give some additional controls because someone else has to validate it. But keep in mind that also means that you have to now give someone else who doesn't necessarily need it for their job, their core job. Now you know, or now you have to give them access to vendor sensitive data on the vendor record, meaning the banking information and perhaps also the tax ID, so they can verify that they're validating the right or confirming the right vendor. So keep that in mind as well. And then anything else that you can think of. And here's where I have a couple of examples. So this one was an actual audit that I did, and I think this was on the Munis system that a lot of higher education institutions or colleges use. And so you can see here, this was financial management for accounts payable. And by the way, this is not a vendor management role. I do not think it was. It's not a vendor management role. But look what they have access to do. They have access to add vendors on the fly. Now that would be scary even with a vendor role, but with a non-vendor role, that is very scary, and that is something that would absolutely be removed. Here as well, this is another tab in that same security audit where I just identified here. You can do it, I did it by employee, but you can do it by position and employee. These are all of or some of the things that are able to be done with the vendor role. And so it identified who had access to what. So you can see it could be broken down by level as well. And I had identified this as something, as an issue, but this is just another example of what was pulled. So let's go to step 4. So once you have, right, all of the security roles, identify what they have access to do, what they have access to see, and then also what positions those are attached to or should be attached to, and then which employees are assigned those roles. Now it comes time where you need to update those security roles, removing access. So in my case, for that financial management accounts payable role that I just showed you, definitely remove the ability to add a vendor on the fly, right? And then, so this is your time to do that. It's also your time to remove employees from specific roles, revise them. That can happen a lot too when employees have termed or maybe have gone to a different department and their roles were not updated. And so this is something too that the IT or system security team may have to do on your behalf. But this is that type of review and submission that the IT team just wouldn't be able to do on their own, but they can complete the revision for you depending on your system, either you or they. And then the last step is making sure that you implement a recurring security role / access audit. I recommend you do it monthly or quarterly, and the steps would be, right, to review, do the same thing all over again, right? Review security role access and team member role reports, remove your term employees, remove transferred employees, verify no changes have been made to the security role, no access changes have been made since you did your initial review, and then submit any changes to IT. It should go much faster, and this also can be done by a team member that's ready to upskill. It's a great project for them. And so on this last slide, I just added here all of the 5 steps so that you can mitigate fraud. Now, really quickly, the Vendor Process Training Center, I did include the 2024 training schedule as a handout. It does include 3 free training sessions, so make sure you check those out. And then here is how to connect with me. I didn't mention my podcast, but I do have a podcast, and I also have a YouTube channel where I post the Vendor Master File Tip of the Week every Tuesday. And then we have about a minute left. If I don't get to your questions, or if you think of questions afterwards, you can always email at info@debrarrichardson.com, and I will reply back within 24 hours. So let me see if there's any questions. I don't see any in here yet. Thank you for everyone who replied back and confirmed that they could see the presentation again. I'm not quite sure what happened to my system, but glad it came back up. All right, so I don't see any questions. Again, if you have any, if you think of any afterwards, email me at info@debrarrichardson.com. I'll reply back within 24 hours. And tomorrow, same time, you will receive a link to the recording. So please share that with any colleagues that you think would benefit from this information. All right, guys. So thanks everyone who joined today, and I hope you have a great rest of your day. So that was the webinar recording, everyone. I hope you got something out of that. And be sure to follow the hashtag on LinkedIn in 5 steps, because I have these monthly webinars each month. They're half an hour. I'm starting to have additional webinars too that are hour long, but these half-hour ones on a monthly basis, again, all have to do with building something, doing something in 5 steps. So make sure you follow, again, the hashtag in 5 steps, so you'll always know what's coming up and maybe what you've missed, that you can go back and watch the recording. So thanks, everyone. I hope you enjoyed the 293rd episode of the Putting the AP in Happy podcast, where accounts payable teams are empowered to protect the vendor master file from fraud. Don't forget to check the show notes for the links mentioned in the podcast. And if you enjoyed this episode, consider subscribing and writing a review of my podcast on the platform that you use to listen. Stay happy.